are so far removed from the idea of America and its minarchism written in the United States Constitution, where we have to bring her back to where she belongs. Thank you for listening to this episode of Chasing Life, Liberty, and Minarchy. The persuasion and all of my peoples from around the place. Happy Sunday. Hopefully those of you in the United States, unless you're in Arizona, have turned their clocks back appropriately. Hopefully you weren't running an hour ahead today, because you would have been like not on time. That would not be good, right? Hope y'all had a great weekend so far. We start off the week speaking on liberty, speaking on the task that we, the people of the states, have at hand, and is to make the federal government as small as possible. Not as limited as possible, but as small as possible. Some people don't like this, like the communist and the socialist, the progressives. They don't like it because there's not the immoral lever that they can pull to control people at their whim. They tell you it's for the greater good of the people. They tell you, these communists and socialists and these, I'm just gonna let's call them what we've always called them, right? Anti-liberty thugs or statist thugs, whichever way you want to call them, right? These people despise freedom. They need an apparatus to use, to cudgel, to beat you and me over the side of the head, right? Because we can't be around, because we have the solutions on how to beat the system, but you have to be forced into the system so their way of life works, right? We see this through taxation, right? You have to pay, even though you don't partake. You don't have kids in school, for example. You don't have kids in school, but your property taxes you pay goes towards schooling, and you haven't had a child in school in 20 years. Sometimes you pay these involuntary taxes for something you'll never use. And even in the short term, Medicaid, Medicare tax, right? Unemployment tax, right? All because a statist or anti-liberty thug needs everybody in a collective to help support their way of life, the way they think society should run. And society ran so much better without these thugs in our presence. All of them, all the thugs. Because when you have to run a society with even the threat of the bayonet, you don't have a society, you have slaves. When you have a government structure that threatens its people to stay in power, using the monopoly of force that they have on it, you're not living free. You're not living free when a bayonet's being pointed in your face after everything you do, even to the point where they can point that bayonet and shoot it indiscriminately without any regard. When victims when victims of crimes become victims of the state, that's a problem. Yes, I'm speaking about what happened in Orange County a couple months ago. Guy had a home invasion, called the sheriff's department, as he's supposed to, because they're supposed to take care of acts of aggression. And they came to the guy's door with aggression. I'm wondering if I could find that video so I can show you what I mean. When you call the authorities that are supposed to be on the side of the victim because they are a victim, they are a victim of a crime, you don't intend you don't think that the same authorities are going to pull up and shoot you because they're under or the criminal. I found the video. I'm gonna play the video before we get into what we're doing because we're gonna wrap this around. We're gonna wrap this around exactly right to the point. If I can get it to come up. Let me see if I can get it. Like I should have had it already queued. Okay, here we go. So I got the whole video. This is the whole video. So let me see if I can get this thing on screen for you guys so you guys can see it real quick. There we go. Let's share this. This is the incident that happened in Orange County, Florida, which is Orlando. Basically, it's Orlando. Um, Individual called said police I'm sorry, the sheriff's office for assistance or call service, and just watch what happens here.
Call. 7-4. How did you get in?
On August 23rd, Orange County Sheriff's deputies responded to a home in the Westwood neighborhood on Sheringham Road just off Silver Star. They came to check out the report of a home invasion.
Jump out the back window. Let's jump the back gate.
Investigators said the victim, in his 40s, had fired shots at 4 suspects who were attempting to break into his home before deputies got here just after 3 p.m. The 4 suspects fled on foot. 2 deputies are at the front door.
Sheriff's office!
The deputy closest to the door backs up, but watch the other one.
Is anybody hurt?
The deputy says, "I didn't mean it."
Hey, I didn't shoot you.
Yes, you did.
I did not.
Yes, you did.
I did not.
Man, you crazy, bro.
Is anybody hurt inside?
No, bro. They were outside. You shot me. Man, come on, man.
That wasn't me, my man. I
Damn.
pulled my gun out there.
You said come outside, bro. You shot me. What the bro?
The Orange County Sheriff's Office says the deputy accidentally discharged his agency-issued firearm and struck the man. He was taken to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries and was released the same day.
I did not.
The Florida Department of Law Enforcement is investigating. The deputy has been relieved of
You guys see what I mean here, right? When the state gets too large and they have the monopoly on force, things like this happen. Things like this happen. These are your tax dollars that they use that same bayonet, right? that shot that guy, the same bayonet is what they will use against you if you don't pay the taxation to pay their salaries. Which brings me to the misuse of this taxation and the reason this episode is called Taxation is Theft, the moral case against redistribution. Because this all comes to a head together, right? Those of you who have never been here before, make sure you like and subscribe so you can catch up with it later in previous episodes. This is the Moral Compass, episode number 2, why the minimal state is the only ethical state. Now, if you go back to episode 1, y'all, right, we've established that the minimal state is the only one ethical consistent with individual rights in the non-aggression principle or the non-aggression axiom, right? Tonight, we're going to tackle the most emotionally charged ethical debate head on: the morality of compulsory taxation for social ends. This episode, I want to ask everybody a question. And you don't have to answer it now. You can answer it later or just throughout your days, weeks, and months ahead. Is taxation for redistribution morally justified? In this episode, I will argue, that the right to property is an extension of the right to self-ownership, which would make mandatory wealth transfer a profound ethical violation, regardless of the beneficial goals of it. Again, before we get into part 1 of this topic, make sure, again, you're liking, subscribing, and all that stuff, sharing it, all that good stuff. Those you on the airwaves, thank you. Those you on social media, from Facebook to here on Rumble, YouTube, Kick, Twitch. I appreciate y'all for hanging in there. Those y'all that following this show from TikTok, I appreciate y'all. All that good stuff. And I hope y'all come back for another episode of this. And the other 4 other shows that we do have on here: the Fifth Estate. I'm sorry, other 3. The Fifth Estate, which is Mondays, 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. Then we got The Experience Today at the same time, 9:30 p.m. Eastern. And we have Southern Liberty on Fridays, 9:35 Eastern. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to catch all those in live and real time. So as we get into part 1, the right to property as self-ownership. The debate over taxation has been a debate over time, right? Whether the taxation we're talking about are tariffs or income taxes or whatever tax, road taxes, gas excise taxes, you name it, just taxation, right? In general, right, the debate over taxation begins not with money, but with the SAO. The SAO meaning self-ownership axiom. Okay. If you accept, right? If you accept that you own your body and your life, you must accept that you own your labor, right? The time and that includes even the time and effort you expend, right? The property you acquire through honest labor and voluntary exchange is therefore an extension of your self-ownership. Your paycheck represents hours of your life that you choose to trade for value, right? Now let's think about let's throw out the unethical violation, right? Just as an example, right? When we talk about coercively taking that property, okay, is morally equivalent to taking a portion of your time, your effort, and ultimately your life, right? As one of my favorite libertarian philosophers, Murray Rothbard, stated, if you coercively take 10% of a person's income, you are effectively claiming ownership of 10% of their life and labor. I want you to think about that a second, right? Now let's place that into a real world example a second, right? Income tax, right? Consider the mandatory collection of federal income tax and payroll taxes, right? Because here in the States, these taxes are automatically withheld before you ever receive your paycheck, right? The state initiates its seizure of your property, not because you committed a crime, but simply because you earned money. If you refuse to pay, the state escalates the threat of force, right? We talked about the monopoly on force, right? Right. And that threat of force is fines, liens, or imprisonment, right? But I will always argue that this system, where the state claims a primary right to your income, is an inherent institutionalized violation of self-ownership. We repeat that again for the people in the back, right? This system of income tax and payroll taxes is an inherent institutionalized violation of self-ownership. Because again, for people that are not that may listen to this and they're not tracking here, right? If you use your time and effort and ultimately, again, your life, right? By taxing your income based on your input, your labor is claiming 10% ownership of your life. Last time I checked, we shouldn't be working for free, right? As we traverse into part 2 of this, and guys, listen, I sat up for 2 days writing this to make sure everything was correct. This is probably one of the hardest episodes already, even though taxation is death, but there's a lot more to it. And I wanted to make sure that I brought it to you from the right headspace instead of just being hoopity hoopla loud in the rafters. I wanted to make sure I stayed ethical and principled as I wrote the bullet points for this episode, right? Because some people listen to this and like, oh, Rod is just crazy. I'm an anarchist instead of a minarchist because people don't know the difference, right? Between the two, right? And I want to make sure it was ethically clear and consistent. So let's talk about the moral corrosion of coerced charity, as I've called this part, and you'll understand why in a second, right? Because your statist friends, I know everybody has a few of those, right? I rage against them every time I get on social media. I get mad when I hear them open their mouth. It makes me want to rage quit everything and just barf on them because it's gross. How people just gets on their knees for the state with no Vaseline. But anyway, I went to a wrong spot there, so let me come back to my ethical behavior here. Sorry, guys. These statists, right, justify not only justify, but shake up and down with maracas and champion the central justification for expansive taxation, right? Because these people want their goal, which is social welfare, to succeed, right? Helping the poor, providing health care, funding education, right? While we all understand that these goals, right, they are compassionate, right? But we all know, and I will still continue to argue, that this method, the method used for this is coercion, right? And this coercion strips the action of its moral virtue, right? You can say, oh, health care is a right. Oh, well, I want to help the poor. We got to fund education. You can't get rid of the Department of Education. But meanwhile, you have a gun up to my head saying that you need to help pay for this, right? These statists are very unprincipled people. So let's throw this out there a second. All right, let's do a small thought exercise a second. Okay, we're going to throw out there coerced charity versus voluntary compassion, right? So let's run through this. Morality, okay? Morality requires agency. And action holds moral weight. Only when it's freely chosen. Now, when taxation replaces donation, ethical action is replaced with legal compliance. Let me say that again for the people in the back, right? Morality requires agency, okay? And without that agency, you can't make solid ethical decisions. You remove the free will of someone to make a choice. But when you take out the bayonet and you point it at somebody, right, and say your donation is no longer accepted, now we're taking more, right? Taxation, right? Now you must comply, right? Now you must comply, right? Because they got the bayonet in your face, right? Let's use a real world example here. I'm going to throw one out there because this seems to be the constant conversation. Let's talk about welfare, right? If I donated $100 to the local food bank, right, to help the needy, right, that in itself we all agree is a moral act of charity, right? But if the government tells me under the threat of force that I got to pay an extra $100 in taxes to fund the SNAP program, now it becomes an act of compliance, not an act of donation for on behalf of compassion, right? This is an act of compliance under threat, right? Because I hold no moral virtue for the second action, even though the same $100 went to the same cause. The state system replaces the individual's moral agency with a coercive mechanism, right? And this is why this is a complete ethical failure of redistribution, right? Because these statists will argue that society needs safety nets, right? Is a utilitarian justification. Those of you that know what utilitarianism is, they basically believe there's the end justifies the means, right? This is what utilitarians believe, right? But y'all know me, and I think a lot of you will agree, right? That we reject this premise on ethical grounds, right? Because no good outcome can justify violating the fundamental rights of a non-aggressor, right? The ethical state must rely on the voluntary compassion of its citizens, not mandatory wealth seizure, right? And we're down to the last part. We've moved through pretty good. Now, I'm going to give you, in the end here, out of all that, my justification for minimal taxation. Those of you that have followed my other two previous series, implementing Minarchy, right? The path to Minarchy. This is going to be literally almost a repeat, right? But not a repeat. But those of you who haven't listened to those other 16 episodes, go take a gander throughout your day. They're no longer than an hour long. You too can become a minarchist. And we all live in harmony and safeguarded with our own individual rights against the state. But anyway, I digress. Make sure you like and subscribe, all that good stuff. So if taxation, right, is technically coercion, right, how can we ethically justify any taxes at all, right? And the answer in that lies in the concept of securing the conditions for rights to exist, right? So the first bullet point I have is the necessity for securing property rights, right? Because the fact that I accept minimal taxation only as the necessary cost of rights protection, right? Remember, if y'all remember from implementing the path to minarchy, right? Going up the incrementalism part, incrementalism path, right? We understand that the cost to protect rights is a very single narrow exception, right? Through the non-aggression axiom, right? Now, I want people to understand the rationale behind this, right? Without sheriff's department, courts, or defense, right? Which just core fronts were laid out in episode 1 of this and episode 1 of the Path to Minarchy, right? Well, that was episode 3 when we talked about policing and the courts and justice system, right? Right. Without a law enforcement agency, courts, or defense, property rights are meaningless. Okay. That they exist only as long as you can personally defend them. Okay. Now, minimal taxation, right, should be viewed as the minimum necessary payment to maintain a framework that secures property rights for everyone, preventing a breakdown into a state of nature where rights are constantly violated. Right? Now, Here's where we get into the ethical constraints. Here's where we get into the ethical constraints on the tax base, right? Because this necessity imposes strict ethical limits on what can be taxed and how much. Right? So what is this ethical limit, right? These taxes, as you remember from the path to minarchy, right? And implementing minarchy, right? These taxes would only fund the military, your sheriff's departments, and your courts, right? Any tax revenue allocated, right? And I want y'all to hear this loud and clear. Any tax revenue allocated to non-defensive functions like education, parks, environmental protection is morally illegitimate, right? It is morally illegitimate. Now, when we talk about the ethical model of this taxation, how do we put this in place, right? As again, I'm referencing previous episodes, implemented minarchy and the path to minarchy, right? This model should be a low, flat consumption tax rather than an income tax, right? Which makes the taxation voluntary, right? Consumption taxes are voluntary taxes, right? They're not ad valorem, right? Taxes, right? They are voluntary taxes, right? Remember, a consumption tax, aka sales tax, and this I'll use this as an example because there's other ways to get a consumption tax, right? Is a tax on spending, which is again a voluntary action, right? Rather than a tax on earnings, like income on income and labor, which is mandatory if you wish to survive, right? This minimizes this consumption tax, right? Minimizes their coercive intrusion into self-ownership because it's not the state coming with the bayonet again, right? And saying you're going to give to this, aka we're going to raise your FICA, right? To pay for more SNAP benefits, right? If you don't, we're coming to pick your natural ass up. No, this is not this. This is you going to the grocery store and paying 6.75% in sales tax, that you are voluntarily paying that tax because you want to purchase these items. This is your choice, and it does not infringe on your self-ownership of your labor, of your time, and of your money that was produced from that labor and time, right? Now, let's look at the world we're in now, right? Let's look at looking at the shutdown, right? The shutdown is over the budget, right? Basically, right? Appropriations, right? Just call it what it is. It's a failure to put money in the budget, right? And this in this current budget, right? They're allocating trillions of dollars to programs that far exceed defense. Right. And this is what's crazy about this argument, because we'll have people, well, we spend $1 trillion on our defense. Why do we need to do that? Shut up, stupid. If we don't have a defense, you cut defense spending. I'm sorry. You're cutting out one of the functions of the actual government. So anybody you hear that says, why do we spend so much on defense? Just tell them, shut the fuck up. Because one of the government's functions is to protect this country. What you should be worried about is all the other shit they're using with the with the tax money they forced you to give them. That's where all that other money is going. Look at all the discretionary spending in the budget. Go look at the CR, people. You don't believe me? Go look at the CR and see what is mandatory spending and what is actually discretionary. And the discretionary will disgust you because it's actually more than the mandatory spending. But y'all worried about the mandatory spending on the defense of the country. Y'all can kiss my ass. You can kiss my ass. But anyway, right? I will always insist, right, that the only a tiny fraction of that budget that they're trying to pass right now in that CR is morally legitimate. The rest is funding unethical, coercive rights violations. All of it. You name it, it probably is. If it doesn't, if there's money in that continuing CR that does not fund the enumerated functions of government per the U.S. Constitution, it is all an unethical and coercive rights violation upon the people. Period. That is exactly what it is and where we're at. As we wrap up and wrap in here now, again, I appreciate y'all hanging out for a little bit while we do the things here, right? But remember that the minimal state, right, by strictly limiting taxation to the protection of rights, honors the property right to the greatest extent possible while pragmatically ensuring the necessary conditions for its defense, right? Now, next week, we turn to episode 4, the self-ownership doctrine, body, mind, and life. We will explore how this moral cornerstone condemns all forms of state control over personal and non-violent conduct. Until then, remember that the moral choice is always in the method, not the outcome. Until next time, remember, keep chasing life and liberty. And you can start that by loving your neighbors, loving your family, but ultimately, you got to love yourself. Until next time, y'all. Peace and love.